Welcome to another episode of the Teaching Canada's History podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Campbell, and today we are speaking with the finalists of the 2024 Governor-General's History Award for Excellence in Teaching. Created in 1996, the award recognizes innovative and impactful approaches to teaching Canadian history. For more information, visit canadashistory.ca/teaching award. Today I'm speaking with Toronto high school teachers Ben Gross and Dan Kunanec about their Tasting History project. Welcome, Dan and Ben.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, appreciate it.
Well, before we talk about your project, why don't you introduce yourselves and share a little bit more about how you both work together?
I think you should go first, Dan. I think that the framing of the farming is really important for anything I would say.
Oh, I appreciate that. Okay, so I am Dan Kunanec, and I teach a few different subjects. They're all experiential in nature. First is green industries, which explains a lot about what we do at our school with urban farming and different historical and new age growing techniques. We also have hospitality and tourism, understanding how food product is used and experiencing relationships with clientele in all different capacities. And then I also teach technological design, which is about the full design process, especially including the build. And that kind of frames what I've been doing at Don Mills for 24 years. Ben?
I teach history and social science, and when I got to Don Mills about 8 years ago now, I sort of did a little tour and found the stuff that Dan was doing, and I was at a point in my career I was really wanting to push the boundaries of historical work and interdisciplinary work, and the stuff that Dan was doing was amazing, and I was like, hey, maybe we can do some things together. So we've been doing projects together for the last 7-8 years, and Tasting History this year was another one of our favorites.
Absolutely.
I love the history of collaboration that you both have. I don't think I realized that before. Will you share more than about this specific project, about Tasting History, and maybe provide kind of the overview of what the project was all about and what the students actually did?
So this year I had a grade 12 world history course, and Dan and I had been wanting to do, we'll give a little bit of the background stuff to sort of help, because the history of collaboration is big for us. We've done a number of collaborative projects between my senior social science and history courses in particular, and Dan's green industries courses. And both Dan and I share a love of pickles. And so we, in my grade 12 history class, I did like a history, like a food history and history of pickles. And then my class and his class got together at the start of the year and made pickles with produce from his farm. And as that was going, we're like, oh, this group really works well together. And this idea of doing something around, there's these stories like the cookbook of Ravensbrück, where it's this concentration camp that was for women only. And they would share these stories of recipes, and they recorded them. And it was, part of it was in this, in the museum, the War Museum, Imperial War Museum in England. I went and visited my sister last year. And it just got me thinking about these connections between food and how important they are in our lives, but also like how overlooked, because it seems like just something we do every day. And sort of chatted with Dan about that. And we're like, oh, maybe something will come up out of that. Let's do some pickles. And then as we kept talking, and as I got to know my class better, and they just loved the pickle project, this idea came back. The kids were really excited about it. So I was like, okay, let's try to do that then. And we reached out to some folks in sort of like the Holocaust education community, particularly Jody Spiegel at Azraeli, who not only, like, Jody also has a history in like food anthropology. And we were like, we're just kind of figuring out what to do with this. Do you have any tips and pointers? And Jody came and met with us and gave us like recipe books from survivors she'd worked with and like all this stuff. And then was like, hey, I talked to Pinka Scooter, and even though they don't really do a lot of like survivor stuff anymore because it's hard and they're old, he would like to come work with the kids. So I was like, Dan, what do you think? And it kind of just revolved around that. We brought the idea to the students because a lot of the kids that I had in my class had taken the genocide elective that I teach the year before, and they just threw themselves into it and really drove most of the project. And we just tried to sort of facilitate and help curate stuff for them. And yeah, all the, like in my class, we focused a lot on like the history and the stories of connection back through generations, which Pincus really helped us with. And then the kids made huge connections between, Pincus's connection to food and how it's changed and stayed the same for him, and then their own connections to food that they hadn't really considered before because it was just something that they did every day. And had some in the reflections on the website. I hope you can see the depth of what they got from it and how it made them think about their own and their families' sort of journeys from where they were to where they are. And just really fortunate to have Dan as a partner who had all these things that he's built that made it possible for us to do it. And maybe Dan, if you want to talk about some of that stuff and the facilities that and program that helped us be able to do any of it in the first place in the collaborative part.
Yeah, absolutely. You've both touched on already just how important that collaboration is between Ben and I. But the more you hear about it, it's a collaboration with Ben and I, with our students that are equal partners, and then people outside of the TDSB organization, be it at OISE, at U of T, Jody Spiegel at the Azrieli Foundation, Pincus now. So those collaborations mean so much, but we're learning with each other at the same time. So we don't always know where it's going to go. And I have my side advantage is the facilities that we've developed over these years. We literally have designed and built. The students have done it. We've raised the money to do it. So that experiential side provides a lot of real honest background to how these things get done. But throughout it all, even though I don't teach history, historical connections are deeply embedded in what we do in our tech programs. Because if you're going to explore, new or traditional farming techniques, that's history. If you're exploring food, how could that not be anything but history? That is history. So for my students that are very hands-on first, to understand that deep, rich academia and thoughtfulness, because Ben's able to provide a richer view on that. And then for me to have opportunities for everybody to just get their hands dirty and get right in there and actually harvest that item that's about to be pickled and tasted. And then we're getting ideas for our next cooking things that we're going to do. And luckily along came Pincus, and there we are using our traditional wood fired oven to make the cholent because the power wasn't working well in the school that day. Okay, let's get the fires going. It was amazing. So I'm out there cooking outside, knowing that I'm not going to miss anything because Ben's students are doing such a great job of recording everything through pictures and the reflections in the website. So I was happy to be that participant that just trusted what was going on inside was happening, and Ben was trusting what was going on outside with me was happening. It ended up being so incredible on the day, but also this many days after reading those reflections. And we didn't know exactly where it was going to go, but when you see and read what the students have put together, it's above and beyond what our expectations could have been. So pretty thrilled.
This project is so experiential and interdisciplinary and all of these things you're talking about, and you've both alluded to the ways that your students are thinking about what they're doing and the history behind it and making all of those connections. Can you share a little bit more about the aspects of historical thinking that your students are utilizing and strengthening throughout this work?
One thing that stood out to me was part of the project was the students. We talked about like sort of historiography and how do you think about like how recipes are made. And because they'd learned about both Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews, they were like, well, then like when we're looking at these recipes, why is this one recipe different than that other recipe, but it's called the same thing? And they did some incredible research to the point where I was like, I can't help you with that. I got to ask Jody. And Jody found some obscure like Jewish history book that had stuff in it that she sent us scans of, that was like this, because the kids had realized that kugel had been a savory dish, and because Pincus had talked about savory kugel, but most of the recipes we found were sweet, and so they were trying to figure out when that happened and how apples got introduced. And so for me, that like continuity and change, but also like the cause and consequence of it and the historical significance of it, because I grew up mostly with sweet kugels as well, because my dad's side of the family is Jewish, and so like, but I never knew. I just sort of assumed it was that way. I didn't ask that question, but they did, and they found answers. So like that ability through the process and having the time in the class outside of this day with Pincus to really think about the food and the history of it and how it was changing and why it was changing, and to come up with like really good questions that I hadn't thought about myself at all, I think is exactly the kind of thing that I was hoping for in terms of getting students to think historically about food. So I think for me that the historiography of the food, of the recipes, really stood out to me as a strong example of them thinking historically about the practical work they were doing.
Yeah, that's honestly, that's, and Ben can attest to this. That's what got me the most excited was the ingredients and the regionality of it all. Comparing a recipe that was Eastern European with a recipe that was North African, and recognizing that it had similar roots but different flavors, and why would that be in that one, and why would this one be in that one. And then having opportunities with Pincus, they're asking how things were actually cooked, what was in the kitchen space, what was the equipment, how did it function, even what kind of wood were you using. Like, I was completely geeking out at these opportunities, and our students could see us geeking out at the same time, which I think only gets them more excited. I'm not sure why they're so excited, but it sounds exciting. So we should all be excited. And then, some of the questions, like the clay vessels that I was seeking out to make the cholent in the wood fired oven. And then the research that allowed me to bring to myself, but also immediately share with the students, bring it to Ben, share it with Jody. And it was just this collective community of little sparks going off everywhere. And the luxury of having a man like Pincus in the room to actually ask those questions about, and seeing the memories come back, and just couldn't be more excited to talk about the fireplace. Oh, it's amazing. It's so good.
That is so special. And like bringing in experts and having experts, that seems to be such a, I want to say like a central component to this project, and to your work. If you're looking bigger picture, even through what you do, even beyond this project, what resources do you find are the most helpful for you when you're teaching and when learning both about history and more? What resources do you like to use, and how do you use them?
I think you have a more interesting perspective on this, Dan. Maybe more untraditional, so maybe more interesting to me. So maybe this one's for you to take first.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I'm not approaching what I do through a purely academic lens, because that's not the way I came into teaching. And my number one resource has always been experts, and more often than not, the older the better, just for these reasons. And then actually creating things, those become resources. So I think traditionally, if you were to ask a teacher about resources, they would automatically go to books, texts, websites, magazines, whatever. Whereas I'm like people, experts, facilities, a lot of land-based learning, location, asking people. So for me, resource is people. And to have a resource like Ben as a colleague, who also has his incredible network. And as we bring our networks together, and then those networks start networking with each other, and then we find out about it sometimes after the fact, we're like, that's pretty cool that they're doing that. And somehow we had an opportunity to introduce amazing people. So bet, as much as Ben passed that one on to me, Ben does it the same way. Like, we find good people, we surround ourselves with them, we honestly build relationships not because it's an ends to a means. It's because we like these people, and we want to be around them. And there's nothing better than having them around our students, and they're getting those experiences at the same time. And so for me, I think, I mean, listen, I'm talking to a couple of historians about history. Everyone has that thought of, wouldn't it be great to go back in time and ask so and so, or see what's going, or I would have loved to have met my great grandfather. And like, this is the stuff that we crave. And so if we can, put together these little journeys very selfishly, for us as well, and then just see what happens. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, relationship as a resource is huge. Um, like I'm thinking about, there's so many thoughts. I'm going to try to get them together, but like having a colleague like Dan who's up for trying new things and sees that this like discipline based silo shouldn't really exist, that like our disciplines have so much to offer each other and our work is so much better because of the work the other person does, is like the first part of that resource. And I mean, the work that Dan did to build that urban farming program before I even knew it existed for 15 years is why this stuff can happen. Like we pickled produce from the farm. A lot of the ingredients we used in the day of cooking with Pincus were from the farm, unless we had to go get, kosher meat and stuff. But yeah, come on, Dan. but but like that relationship as resource is really huge. And I think the way that we think about that too, over the years that we've worked together, is very much in terms of reciprocity, right? Like we tend to find people who are interested in the same kinds of things that we're interested in, and then we have lots to offer each other and support each other, and we have the same curiosities and interests, and that really is really helps to build the possibilities of what you can do over the years. And when I think about resources and relationships too, I think about like Dan. This might be a bit of a non sequitur, but it just popped into my head when Dan was talking about like, wouldn't you like to go talk to your like great grandfather or whatever? And I had a student who brought me. He went home the week after all this and made his grandmother's tomato sauce recipe and brought me a couple of jars of it. It was so good, man. Like, but like, what is that? Like, how lucky are we, right? Like, and it comes because he felt that deep connection, that deep relationship. It sparked in him that desire to connect to his own past, and like, what else are we doing? So I like that just stood out to me. And then even for myself, like as we were going along, as Dan said, like we weren't really sure where we were going. So we have all of the like resources. We used stuff that we got from the memoir, the Israeli Foundation memoirs, because there's all kinds of reflections on food and stuff in there that we use in terms of like books, and obviously working with Pincus and Jody's knowledge of Jewish food history. And there's just so many of those types of things. And then as we're going along, my dad is second generation Jewish immigrant from Eastern Europe. Both of his parents fled pogroms in the early 1900s, right before and right after World War I, right before the Exclusion Act came in, limiting Jewish immigration into Canada. And then I was like, well, all these kids are like really opening up and talking about their personal connections. What am I doing? So my parents Zoomed in, because they live in Manitoba, and did a session on, being that second generation, right? The children of immigrants. And like 90% of my class is children of immigrants, and talking about that experience that they had 60 years ago, 70 years ago as like teenage children of immigrants. And
Absolutely.
the number of things that as I'm watching the kids going like, yeah, like I'm dealing with that too. Like, how do I bridge these expectations of my parents, but I'm in a new place? And like my Baba, my dad's mom, was very much of the mind of like, let's out with the old, in with the new. Whereas his other aunties were very much like traditional. And so Anyway, I'm sort of sidetracking here, but it's got me thinking about all these things that come up when we start to really build strong relationships based on like mutual interest and curiosity, and how that becomes an incredible resource for doing and thinking and learning about interesting things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. The school that we're at in Toronto is incredibly multicultural, and that's such a blessing. I mean, we got students from everywhere. Probably, if not the one of the most multicultural buildings in the TDSB, which is saying a lot, to be in Toronto and have that. And teaching a course like hospitality and talking about food, the conversations that just open up when you're talking about food, and it's the commonalities that come up, as well as the differences. But the differences are now interesting. We don't do it that way. What's that flavor like? And finding out where a student is from. And Ben, you'll remember this when one of your students, who's here from Ukraine right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I happen to have some sauerkraut, some kapusta that I had made in the fridge at school, and I was able to give her some. And just that moment of like, I haven't had this since I was there, and bringing it home to have with her family. And that's the connections that food makes. But it's also those cross-cultural but also similar story connections. Like, we can connect with anybody when it comes to food. Therefore, history and tradition and cultures all become intertwined, and that, I think, that's the magic of working with food, um, as a focus of history. It opens things up immediately.
And I forgot to tell you, you don't have to record this part if you don't want to, but that student gave me this at the end of the year.
Oh, a little pickle. Emotional
It's an
support.
emotional support pickle. I will always be around to let you know that you are a big dill.
I love that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing all of these anecdotes.
I want to get that. Where'd she get that?
I don't know.
Did she
You are a
hand
big
knit
deal.
it?
Sorry?
Did she hand knit it?
I don't know. Because I wasn't in the office. I didn't get to see her. Another teacher said, "Oh, this student dropped this off for you." And I opened up the box, and it's a little note just saying, "Thank you so much for all the food stuff. Loved like the pickles and the baking and everything. Here's
Awesome.
a pickle."
That's awesome.
That's amazing. I love that so much.
Mm.
I don't even think I need to ask you about impact, because that's exactly what you've been sharing, like all these stories and wonderful tidbits. But maybe I'll say, if there's one other defining moment about what this project has done for your students or for your community or anything like that you want to share, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, I'll take one first.
Yeah, please. I think I got to sort through some thoughts.
You gotta squeeze your emotional support pickle there. Calm down. So for me, because I think a lot of my work was more front end on this, and of course, supporting Ben's awesome ideas. For me, it was the moment I saw the website for the first time, because that was the reaction from the students, as pure as it gets. The design, the layout, the pictures taken and chosen, but the reflections that they were writing, I mean, I could barely I had to start over so many times because I was getting very weepy, very, very often. And then, being part of this action research group at OISE, having an opportunity to present the website to other people that are educators, multiple disciplines, and seeing them have the same reaction, it was quite remarkable. And it's so humbling to be part of something like that and see the net result and hear the net result and feel the net result, not knowing for sure that this is where it's going to go. And you can only be hopeful that you're making impacts. Like seeing the emotional support pickle is like, that's a thing. But here it is in perpetuity. And as I think, as a website, it's so connected to the masses. So some of the stuff that I'm doing with OISE, it's like a lot of that work ends up in research papers, which is great. But who's going to read that? Like, it's only going to be a professor or a grad student, or maybe another, nerdy teacher that is looking for something that may or may not have access to that. Whereas I think a website like this done by the students for everybody in the world is just, it's so powerful. And I think, being able to bring history to a living history, to an actual moment of now, and history in the future where things could go. That to me, when I saw that website, I was just like, oh my god, like look what has happened here. And very, very emotional every time I look at it, because it's talking about grandmothers and grandfathers and families and struggles, but also it talks about joy and celebration out of all of that. So that's my impact. How you doing, Ben? You ready? No.
Yeah, I mean, love that. The there are a few things along the way that really stood out to me as we're doing something pretty special here. So I'm going to focus, I think, on a few things that happened that didn't need to happen that were good. Like, this was a project for a class where kids are in grade 12 in a university course trying to get marks to like get into school. There are certain things that they were getting marked on and other things that they weren't, but we still had to do, like they still had to happen. So I'm going to think maybe those ones really stood out to me. So like the day of cooking, I had to get there early because the challah takes forever to rise. It's a double proof bread. So I had to start it at like 7:30. And so I told the kids, if anybody wants to come and make challah with me, I have to get it started at 7:30. You can meet me in Mr. K's kitchen. Like 8 kids came. More than a quarter of the class showed up at 7:30 to help make they didn't have to do that. That was like, because I was like, I'm going to have a lot of work getting this done so that maybe 1 or 2 will show.
Yeah.
It was no problem at all. Like that's something. And then even the website, like we finished it during the class time because I had to like mark all the contributions, but there were 4, but like 3 kids really that were like, we're not happy with it. They probably spent another 20 hours working on it through like March and February because they didn't think it was what they wanted it to be yet.
And this was after their semester.
The marks are done. Like the course is over. Everything's in. So like thinking about that impact was big. And then for the students in particular. And then I think in terms of like a community impact that was big for me outside of that student one was that like Pincus deciding to come was a big deal. I don't ask survivors to come and speak anymore because it's a small group. They might do a big thing, but that's about it. And Jody just happened to know Pincus was interested in food histories and just mentioned it to him because there was no ask. And he said he wanted to do it. Like that was really moving for me as well, for a person who's, in his 90s, has lots of things to do in his life. And then for him to just sort of say, hey, like, I'd love to do that. And I think there was something special in that so much of Holocaust survivors' lives in terms of interaction with education after the Holocaust has been about reliving their experiences as Holocaust survivors. And this wasn't that. The part of this was trying to see not just Holocaust survivors, but also Jewish folks as more than just victims of a tragedy during World War II, more than just victims of the Holocaust, but people with full actual lives, right? And when Dan mentioned a few minutes ago about like Pincus lighting up with these questions, he was like smiling and laughing. You could see a memory come and like the smile would come across his face, and he'd be like, oh, let me tell you about like this chimney in this apartment block. And we'd throw the potatoes into the soot, and you'd pull them out a few minutes later, brush them off, open them up, and you'd have this potato that you'd eat. And he'd written something about like stuffed goosenecks, and the kids had to know what a stuffed gooseneck was. So he's describing stuffed goosenecks and giving his like very, very strong opinions about what's real gefilte fish and what's not. And like the opportunity for us to be in a space with a person who experienced such tragedy, but to talk about parts of his life that were so joyful, I think were really, really powerful and had a big impact on the kids. You can see sometimes in their reflections, they sort of think about the Holocaust a lot, but then it comes back out again because all they've learned for the most part about Jewish folks in the past is about the Holocaust. And this allowed them to see outside of that. And I think that helped them also for themselves to see outside of whatever big narrative they have about themselves, to look at other parts of it. So I think for me, that's sort of like a community impact piece. And then the student impact ones were these moments where kids really stepped up and did things that were not required.
What a special way for your students to learn and to walk away with all of these, self-reflections, as you said, and just understandings. Thank you so much, Ben and Dan, for sharing all that you've been doing with us.
Thanks for having us.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it was lots of fun.
You have to come and visit Don Mills when you're in Toronto.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime.
Yeah.
Happy to. I want to see the food lab.
Dan gives a great tour.
Oh, I bet. Thanks so much.
There's often some goodies after too.
Oh, even better. I want some of these pickles. That's what I really want.
Well, so in the fall, I'm doing, we have the genocide course in the fall, and I'm going to try to grow beets inside and then do pickled beets with that group, thinking about Jewish history in the East.
Oh.
So I'm hopeful for that. Dan also does maple syrup on site. So if you can organize a spring trip.
Any time of year, we're doing something good. So
sounds amazing. Oh my gosh. Very, very cool. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you sharing this with us.
You're amazing, Brooke. Thank you.
Thank you.